summer of 2012, 3 urban explorers, 2 men, 1 woman, all in their 20s, drove an hour southeast of Seoul to a mountain outside the town of Gwangju. They were looking for a building. It was a psychiatric hospital. 6 stories, concrete and tile. Closed, they had been told, in the summer of 1996, in the middle of a business day. The front door was open, not unlocked, open, propped it looked like by the last person who had left. Inside, the 3 of them found medical files on the floor, furniture still in the rooms, a staff calendar on the wall, stopped on the month of July 1996, mattresses, articles of clothing, a nurse's logbook with the final entry mid-sentence. They climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. One of them later wrote online, anonymous, no screenshot allowed, that they had intended to reach room 402 on the 4th floor. That was the legend. That was why people came. They did not make it past the 2nd. Welcome to Hollow Atlas. Every episode, one real place. What happened there? What the record shows. What the record cannot explain. Tonight, the building that CNN listed in 2012 as one of the 7 most terrifying places on the planet. The hospital that closed in a hurry left its patients' files on the floor and was avoided, even by local residents in the town just down the hill, for the next 22 years. Until, in May of 2018, the Korean government tore it down. The official name of the hospital was Namyang Mental Hospital, though almost no Korean source calls it that. Locals called it Gonjiam. After the town, it opened in December of 1992, a private psychiatric facility intended to house about 90 to 100 long-term patients. Most of the patients were elderly. Most had been there by the mid-90s, for more than a decade. On paper, the hospital functioned. On the ground, according to later journalistic reporting by the Korea Times and by Seoul-based mental health advocates, the facility had been the subject of repeated complaints about sanitation, about restraint practices, and, most concretely, about raw sewage flowing untreated into the watershed that fed the town of Gwangju directly below it. In early 1996, the Korean government passed the Water Source Protection Act. The hospital, to comply, would have needed to install a modern sewage treatment facility. The cost was more than the hospital could afford. In July of 1996, the staff walked out. The director, Kim, as he has been named in secondary Korean language sources, surname preserved, first name withheld, did not return. What urban explorers found inside Gonjiam from roughly 2008 onward is unusual in one specific way. It is not that the hospital was abandoned. Many abandoned hospitals in former communist bloc countries, in rural Japan, in the United States, have been photographed by explorers for decades. It is that Gonjiam was abandoned midday, mid-task, mid-sentence. Patient medications, half dispensed, sat on trays. Records stayed in filing cabinets. Personal possessions stayed in the lockers. Shoes, dozens of pairs, remained lined up outside ward doors, as Korean custom requires. One photographer who entered the building in 2015 reported finding a handwritten note on a staff whiteboard. Mrs. Park, meds, 3 p.m. The note had not been erased, 19 years after the hospital closed. What happened to Mrs. Park and the 40-odd other patients still on the ward register when the doors were left open is, according to later Korean government records, that they were transferred to other psychiatric facilities over the course of several weeks. No one died on the property. That is the official record. It does not explain why the building was left in the state it was. It does not explain why the director, Kim, reportedly never reclaimed his office files. It does not explain why the final logbook entry, made by a registered nurse on the 2nd floor, Ward B, reads, in full translation, "Unit is no longer safe. Will return." She did not return. Between 1996 and roughly 2008, the building was, outside a small circle of Korean ghost hunter blogs, essentially forgotten. It was well known in the town of Gwangju. It was less well known elsewhere. That changed in the fall of 2012. CNN Travel published a list of what the outlet called, in English, the 7 freakiest places on the planet. Gonjiam was listed third. The CNN article repeated a rumor. Several rumors, actually. They were not original to CNN. They had been circulating in Korean online forums for years, but CNN's platform lent them global reach. The rumors said that the hospital had closed because patients had died under suspicious circumstances, that the director had disappeared or committed suicide on the property, that the facility had been abandoned because staff refused to keep working after something had happened on the second floor. Investigative reporting by the Korea Times, by Seoul-based Yonhap News, and, most thoroughly, by the Korean Health Ministry archives themselves, has since established that none of those rumors are true. The director did not kill himself. No patients died in custody. The closure was financial and regulatory. But CNN's article, and the rumors it repeated, brought 200, then 2,000, then tens of thousands of visitors, Korean teenagers, Japanese photographers, American servicemen stationed at Osan Air Base, half an hour away. And the explorers kept coming because the building was still there, and the doors were still open, and everything inside, by 2015, 2016, 2017, was exactly as it had been on the day in July of 1996, when the staff walked out. That is what is unusual. Not the rumors. The stillness. We are going to pause Gonjiam now, because something has to change about this episode, and it has to change here. In 1954, a Canadian psychologist named Donald Hebb at McGill University began running a series of experiments on sensory deprivation. He paid healthy university students to lie in a quiet, dim, padded room with goggles on. They were fed. They were comfortable. They were not restrained. They were simply cut off from most of their normal sensory input. Most of them quit within 48 hours. Not because of boredom. Because, within hours, they began to see things. Geometric patterns, then figures, then full scenes in front of them that they could describe but not touch. Hebb's finding was the founding paper of a branch of perceptual psychology that now has thousands of citations. The principle is this: when the brain does not receive the ordinary input it expects from a room, it generates input. This is not pathology. It is how a healthy nervous system behaves, reliably, under sensory restriction. Gonjiam was not a sensory deprivation chamber, but it came close, in specific and documented ways. The building sat at the end of a dirt road, half a kilometer from the nearest highway. Its windows, most of them, were broken, which dropped the ambient temperature inside, year-round, to something cooler than the body expected. Its walls absorbed rather than reflected sound. Most of the lighting fixtures were broken. On overcast days, the interior of the building was pitch dark within 3 meters of any entrance. A visitor, walking alone, would experience dim light, cold, a near total absence of normal ambient noise, and an environment the human brain has evolved to distrust. A medical institution where the records are still open, and the shoes still lined up, and the staff are not there. This combination, sensory dampening, ambient cold, narrative priming from the CNN article, the expectation of encountering something, is, to a reasonable approximation, an informal field experiment in hallucination conditions. Every person who walked through the second floor of Gonjiam in 2012, in 2015, in 2017, was biologically a test subject. Their reports were consistent across the decade. Almost all of them described the same thing: a pressure, physical, felt in the chest, that intensified on the second floor corridor. a reluctance to continue, an auditory event, one that they describe variously as a whisper, a distant voice, a fragment of Korean they did not understand. Some of them reached the third floor. Fewer reached the fourth. Room 402, the supposed intensive care unit, the core of the online legend, was reported by most explorers to be accessible. The door opened. The room was empty, the same as every other room. The number of urban explorers who, over 22 years, reported reaching room 402 and calling it anticlimactic is very high. The number who reported a wall of dread on the second-floor landing and turning back is also very high. That is the pattern, not a haunting, a repeatable physiological response to a very specific set of environmental conditions, and to the knowledge, entering the building, that staff walked out in the middle of a shift and never came back. Psychology cannot explain everything about Gonjiam, but it can explain why nobody who went in came out saying nothing. In early 2018, a film called Gonjiam Haunted Asylum was scheduled for theatrical release in South Korea. The building's owner at that point, a private party who had bought the site years after the closure, went to a Seoul court seeking an injunction. The suit argued that the film and the attention it would generate would continue to bring trespassers and urban explorers onto his property, and that he could not secure the building. The court ruled in favor of allowing the film's release. In May of 2018, 2 months later, the owner brought in excavators. The building is gone. The foundation has been covered. The land has been recontoured. Satellite imagery from 2020 onward shows a forested slope with no structure on it. The files, according to Korean press, were incinerated. The shoes outside the ward doors and the note about Mrs. Park and her 3 p.m. medication are gone. The original story, the rumor CNN repeated in 2012, was that the director of Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital disappeared after the closure, or killed himself, or was never heard from again. The Korean press has, several times, established that this is not what happened. The director survived. He was not charged with any crime. He settled in another part of the country and, as far as public records reveal, did not speak to the press about the hospital. What he did not do, in 30 years, was come back to the building. He did not return for his office files. He did not return to collect the hospital's medical records. He did not oversee the transfer of his patients. He handed that task to a staff member and, as a private Korean citizen, exercised his right to silence. Whatever he knew about the last month of Gonjiam's operation, he took with him. He is the second ghost of this building. The first is the absence. 40-odd patients, a staff of roughly a dozen, a director and a nurse who wrote in the final logbook, "Unit is no longer safe. Will return." She did not. And now the building doesn't either. In the town of Gwangju, at the base of the hill, the residents still tell children not to walk up that road after dark. Not because of a ghost, because it is, for them, a place where something went wrong that nobody ever fully explained. And the instinct, in a small town, is to stay away from places like that. Urban